I guess that was that. Welcome, welcome, Maskagro. Thank you for joining us. Masa al khair, sabah al khair. Bonjour. We are at NubiaFest 2021 and so grateful for you joining us from wherever you are in the world. Please take a moment, share this video, tag a friend, tell a friend to tag a friend, and tell us where you're tuning in from. My name is Dima Mahmoud. I am Nubian from what is today called Sudan, and I am joined here by two of my favorite humans in the world to speak and chat about Nubia and how we know Nubia and why we know Nubia. So I will yield and have each introduce themselves, and we'll get started with the conversation. Vincent.
Hi, I'm Vincent van Garven-Oei. I'm a specialist in Old Nubian. I'm tuning in from somewhere where it's dark, and I'm already so tired, but this is just the beginning of the week, so this is how we all feel.
Yes, and the best for last. No offense, Vincent, but I mean, it's Minna we're talking about here. Minna, ahlan, ahlan.
I am Minna. I am an architect and a predicted Nubian. What is now deemed the most important Nubia from a traffic jam in Riyadh.
Stuck in a traffic jam. And for those who have tuned in our opening session and are tuning in now and seeing Minna again in the car, no, Minna is always on tour, but there's always something to be done. There's always something to be done, and it's why we so appreciate her, because with all that she is juggling, she will always carve the time to remind us to know Nubia and remind us how to know Nubia. And so I'll take a moment to share this video as well, and I'll start perhaps for those who haven't tuned معنا هتكلم بالعربي شوية. Vincent, sorry, I'll just be giving a little bit of a glimpse in Arabic for those who are tuning in. مساء الخير, السلام عليكم, أهلا وسهلا بيكم. الفقرة دي من نوبيا فيست أو نوبن كوري هنتكلم فيها عن أهمية التوثيق للتراث النوبي، ازاي وليه، وخصوصا في الديجيتال ايج اللي احنا فيه مع التكنولوجيا وفيسبوك وتويتر وانستغرام والحاجات دي كلها، ازاي نقدر نستخدم الوسائل دي لتوثيق التراث النوبي وتعزيز واحياء اللغه النوبيه اللي هي على وشك الانقراض. واللي ما حضروش معانا امبارح كان في فقرة مع الأستاذ الشاعر النوبي العظيم عم محمد عمر، اللي ادانا نصايح وادانا معلومات قيمة جدا على اللغة النوبية وعلى تعزيز اللغة النوبية وعلى مجهوداته في دعم أي مجهود في تعزيز وإحياء اللغة النوبية. هنعتذر إن إحنا هنتكلم شوية عربي وشوية إنجليزي، والاعتذار مش عشان إحنا بنتكلم اللغتين، هو الاعتذار الأساسي إن إحنا مش عارفين نتكلم باللغة النوبية. أتليس أنا هتكلم عن نفسي، أنا معرفش اللغة النوبية لكن بحاول، وهنحاول دلوقتي الكونفرسيشن الحوار بالإنجليزي. معانا الدكتور الأستاذ فينسنت، وهو واحد من الأكاديميين الكبار جدا في الحفاظ اللغة النوبية القديمة، وعامل قاموس عامل عليه حلقة النهاردة الصبح، بس هنتكلم برضو على دور الأكاديميين ودور المجتمع النوبي في الحفاظ على التراث النوبي ودور التكنولوجيا. فشكرا لمشاركتكم معنا، ولو عندكم أسئلة يعني لما نحاول بالكلام بالإنجليزي، لو في أي سؤال حتى لو بالعربي يا ريت تحطوه معنا في الكومنتس، وهنشوفه إن شاء الله ونقدر نرد عليه. فبشكركم. ومنى الظاهر النت قطع عندها، بس هترجع تتواصل معنا وتدخل. شكرا. Vincent, it looks like we've lost Minna to the tech gremlins yet again. And as you said, this is just the beginning of the week. So what I am choosing to take from this is that this is going to be one powerful week. And that's my story and I'm sticking to it.
Let's take it like that.
Okay, well, it's very fitting that you and I are having this conversation here again, because it's ultimately this conversation that got us started, that connected us. It's also the conversation that got NubiaFest started. In what role do each of the quote-unquote stakeholders of Nubian heritage play in the preservation of Nubian heritage? And I only use stakeholders for lack of better terminology here. But before we go there, I want to ask you, as someone who is an academic and a scholar in this field, a biologist and a fierce one at that, where you see Nubia within the academic scenes?
Well, it's nice you're asking this question, because that's precisely what I'm working on at the moment. I am this summer I started working on a new book, and it deals with the origins and the development of Nubian studies, Nubiology as an academic discipline, which is a rather complicated business. And the development of Nubian studies is very much tied, or at least that's what I think, is very much tied to the way Nubia has been defined by scholars. So not by the Nubians themselves, because they are hardly ever asked, but by but by scholars. What is fascinating is that Nubian scholarship for a long time was done as a sort of type of, appendix to Egyptology. That's how it was seen. With Egyptology itself being relegated to the margins by classical studies, right? So you have with the development, and Martin Bernal describes this very interestingly in Black Athena. You have with the development of the romantic idea of the classical period, classical Greece. You have also a whitewashing of ancient European history, which starts in the 18th century and kind of becomes a full-blown whitewashing in the 19th century, which comes with racism and the development of scientific quote-unquote racism, and the idea that the old Greeks were white and that their temples were white, even though we know that these were all very colorful, polychromic, exuberant buildings. Now we all think that these things were totally white and pristine white as a fucking porcelain doll. This is, of course, nonsense. And the old Greeks weren't white either. This is also nonsense. They got around the Mediterranean, and we all know how to have fun. So the idea, nevertheless, took hold that Greece became the cradle of European civilization. Therefore, it had to be white because Europeans are white. And therefore, also any type of influence from outside Greece on Greek civilization had to be kind of ignored and explained away, which includes Egypt. So Egypt, which for a very long time was considered an integral part of European classical civilization, as even Greeks describe Egypt as the fount of knowledge. The gods go hang out in Nubia, like that all used to be part of like a rather shared cultural context. That became cut out in the 19th century. As a result, Egyptologists were kind of desperate in turn. You're frozen. Are you still hearing me? Just checking. Dima? Can you hear me, Dima? Or
Yes.
am I the one that's frozen, or are you the one that's frozen?
No, it's me. I hear you.
Okay, so I just keep talking, okay? Please bear with me.
Vince.
Yep.
Oh, yes.
I will keep talking. Is that fine? I mean, will people hear it, or is it just a disaster?
No. People are hearing it. It's just the connection on my side getting heavy. There's a lot of energy.
Okay, people are actually saying keep going. Okay, so like I will, if mention in the comments when my connection breaks down, but it should be okay. So in the 19th century, Egyptologists became also very desperate to kind of regain their position of privilege, let's say. And as a result, they also started to whitewash Egypt. So after the Greeks, the Egyptians were whitewashed as well. And from that period comes this kind of ridiculous idea that all the Egyptians, all the ancient Egyptians, and all the pharaohs were all white as as whatever, white as the whitest Irish person. Which of course is completely nonsensical, right? Egypt is in Africa. There has been trade and migration for ages up and down the Nile. Obviously, these people were not white. Obviously, the Greeks weren't white. I mean, anyhow. But with this type of response of Egyptologists towards being kicked out from classical studies, came that they kicked the Nubians out from like Egyptological discourse, right? So you always kick, right? So like the Greeks kicked out the classicists kicked out Egyptologists, and the Egyptologists are like, well then fuck Nubia. And so what you see is that the racist theories developed in Europe at the time became applied to Egyptology, and then the Egyptologists in turn tried to apply that to Nubia. And that's when you get these very problematic ideas about Nubia was the hinterland of Egypt. As an Egyptologist, I'm going to unquestionably accept the Egyptians' account of the Nubians, like let's say, so the way in which the Egyptians from pharaonic times talked about the Nubians was not always very positive, because obviously they were neighbors, and so there was a lot of fighting. So the Egyptians weren't always very pleased with their neighbors, and I'm sure that was mutual. And when I say Egyptian again, I'm not talking about the Egyptian state. I'm talking about those who spoke or were part of pharaonic Egyptian culture up to the New Kingdom, basically. And so that cluster of problems created the scholarly position of Nubia that we have today. And that let's say neglect of Egyptology for Nubia still resonates, I think, with the way that Nubiologists relate to their own fields. I still see that there is very much. It's getting better and better. Obviously, we are improving, but that tension with Egyptology is still there. And the colonial mindset that came with many of the archaeological excavations in the 19th century in Egypt and in Nubia is sometimes also still there, in the way that in the way that local Nubians are dealt with. I mean, to give you an example, Mina, you're back in a home with a good internet connection.
Well, a good internet connection is always questionable.
Okay, but
can you hear me?
sounds already, yeah, it's fantastic.
See, now that's how we should do it then.
Yeah. So,
so let me interject here and ask,
yeah, go ahead. Sorry, yeah.
Ask not just about the origin of how this came about, but right now, how are we seeing, based on what you know of this history that you are sharing, how are we seeing Nubia being integrated in any capacity? Because even in you saying Nubia being a footnote or an appendix to Egyptology, in many ways you still have this conversation. Now, I am Nubian of what is today called Sudan, but I grew up in Egypt. And anytime I would say, you know, I'm Sudanese or I'm from Sudan, the almost the immediate response is like, oh, well, Sudan was ours. And it's kind of not even kind of, it's quite literally the same mentality that is imposed on Nubia, is that, oh, well, Nubia is like a stretch or a baby of a child of Egyptology. And you will find academics say stuff like that, which is like, whether it's in public fora or in side conversations, on national television in Egypt. In fact, they'll tell you like, oh, and this was quite ridiculous. Like, my blood still boils every time. Don't get me wrong. I very much disapprove of the propaganda, the Qatari propaganda that was being done around the Meroitic pyramids. But when, what's her name, Sheikh Hamoza went and took these photos by the Meroitic pyramids, the Bajrawiya, Egyptian media, national television just lost its composure. It was just like, oh, you think these are pyramids? These aren't pyramids. And then the conversations you see on social media about that, in that, oh, these pyramids are much smaller because the pharaohs built them for their slaves who were black, because the Egyptian pharaohs were white. I mean, and then, no, hang on. And then they correlated to the fact that today, the porters, the butlers, the help, all the domestic bracket of society is darker skinned, is black, is Nubian, is, you know, whatever it is. But that's the frame today, and they will draw these connections. So you're willing to trace the continuity, but you're not willing to go to the root.
Yes, and so on the one hand, these parallels are very attractive, right? The parallels between how pharaonic. Am I still here?
You're here.
The parallel between the relations between pharaonic Egypt and Kush, and Egyptology and Nubiology, and current Egypt and current Sudan as nation state. So there are all kinds of parallels in these relationships, but I think we also should be very, very precise about the differences. These things are not the same. These relations are not the same. The vocabularies are not the same. And to conflate these traditions and these relationships that, you know, that cross millennia, is also not to really acknowledge what are the precise issues right now. So I always want to balance, on the one hand, between seeing the larger picture, in which you can indeed trace out these types of knowledges over centuries, over millennia, but at the same time to be precise about how these dynamics play out right now in our field. Right, which you cannot say, oh, it was always like this, or oh, you know, like this also happens here and there for so and so. No, like if we talk about the position of Nubian scholarship today, then let's talk about that position. And I think that there has been a tremendous effort to integrate in academia Nubian studies within a broader context of medieval studies, within a broader context of ancient studies, classical studies within a context of African studies, these things are happening. It is slow, but it is happening.
Yes. May I say something that might ruffle some feathers here? First, let me just move into Arabic for 1 minute and واشكر أمير الحسن. واضح ان هو قريبي من جوستل، واقول له انه كمان يومين هدي محاضره عن جوستل ومباني جوستل وعماره جوستل. And thank you, Radwa. I think all my cousins are coming in to watch and they are commenting on this, so I just had to shout out to all the cousins. But I would like to just reel this in a bit. First of all, to debunk the whole idea that archaeology is an exact science, to the fact that they have the audacity to qualify as STEM, for God's sake. And the fact that this archaeology, Egyptology, and all these fields did not get funded and feed on state narrative and state-making narratives, whether it's the Egyptology, whether it's Sudan studies, whether all these even Egyptology as a state-making narrative or an identity-making narrative for the white Europeans who started, like, this whole field started because Europeans thought this is actually their heritage because it's white heritage, while because there is no way in hell the Negro in Africa can build all these things. So we cannot really speak about these fields without, foregrounding that and positing that these are all about state-making and identity-making projects. Within them lies also the whether it's medieval studies or archaeology, but also in contemporary studies and anthropology of Nubia, whether it's in Egypt or in Sudan, and kind of shoving our stories to fit into a state narrative, and whatever doesn't fit gets erased in the way. And I know this puts this whole stream in danger, but I don't think it's a realistic discussion. When we speak about these sciences without actually knowing that these are there to serve all these kinds of knowledges about history and story making, and are there to make the nation state as we know it now. So as you say, Dima, so Egyptians think Sudan is theirs, and it's Sudan. Nubia is not even Nubia is just like a subaltern. Nubia is just like a subaltern existence that does not matter. Right. So
that if you see a Nubian walking on the streets in Cairo, the first thing that will be said to that Nubian is Yazol. Like,
yes,
it's void. It's not sticking. That like
it's and do not also. Well, let's also not forget to say that there was a history of enslavement for 800 years under the Bakht Treaty. So let's not just forget that there was also a relationship of enslavement between people with our skin color, like between people who are lighter in skin color and people who are darker in skin color, that was brought in by colonizers as well, different kind of colonizers and older ones, but it was brought into this area, and that governs the relationship we have now. Like, I think like 4 years ago or something, I went into a Virgin Mega stores in Egypt to find a greeting card, funny, that says something like, well, it's in Arabic, says "Amut fi mahbubi walau kana abdu nubi," which means like, I would love you even if you were a Nubian slave, which by Nubian slave means black and ugly. That's what it means. I would love you even if you were black and ugly. But that's the term, and I had to like.
Please tell me you shut that place down.
Oh my God, I did so much. Yeah, I don't even need to tell you. I just
needed to hear it outside my head to know that it happened.
No. I just, like, talked a lot of. Yeah. Let me not say a bad word. Yeah. Anyways, it's. Yeah, so this is why Vincent just wanted. I did not mean to take down your work. I know there is this amazing work that's going by historians, but yeah.
I completely agree with you, and I mean you were just out in the car or parking or something, but this was precisely what I was telling Dima earlier, that we should precisely look at the way that these fields are politically constituted. I mean, to give an example, so I mean, and this is also part of a current research I'm doing. So to give an example, when you talk about Sudan studies, it is absolutely astonishing how you look at the proceedings of the International Conference of Nubian Studies over the years, and you see that, and catalogs that are produced by Nubiologists, and you see that, like, after '89, after Bashir comes to power, boom, Sudan studies is a thing. Like, literally overnight, people will change their entire narrative. Why? Because they want to keep their concessions. They want to keep their archaeological concessions. And in order to do that, they will just change their entire ideological framing of their project without shame. And it's completely, I mean, it's revealing if you actually see the paragraphs next to it. I mean, another, I would say, rather shocking example is a rather senior, I'm not sure if I should name names already, but like, it's a rather senior Sudanese archaeologist who, like, late 70s, writes a passionate plea for Nubian dignity, Nubian culture, and this person himself is Nubian. And then, like, after '89, like the first proceeding of the International Conference for Nubian Studies, he writes this, like, basically nationalist creed on how there should be a Sudan nationalist archaeology. And I'm like, if you put these things next to each other, it's like literally a different person. So yes, these things are of enormous importance for the way that we analyze our field, and it should be done much more often. I mean, another example, how insidious these, because it's not only like in open racism or in this type of blatant displays of trying to please the powers that be. It is also like in the small things. So, like, I was, today I was reading in the library the excavation records, or like the reports from Pharos. And Pharos was excavated in the early '60s as part of the UNESCO campaign by the Polish Center for Mediterranean Archaeology, and it was like the big thing, right? The miracle from Pharos, like cathedral. Oh my God, these people built cathedrals. Obviously, they're very civilized now, so, right? Which is also this kind of really weird narrative in itself. Okay, now that they have cathedrals, now we're really going to pay attention, right? And so, and I'm going to read you, like, because what is amazing in these reports is that Nubians are hardly ever present. Like, it's as if, and we're talking about Nubia before the inundation, right? Before people were literally removed from their lands. These people are still living there at the moment while all these archaeologists come to excavate, right? It's not that the land was empty and then the archaeologists come and they have a year before the water comes. No, I mean, there was this type of period of coexistence. But the Nubians, even though they are physically there, they're never there in the reports, except for example, this. And I'm going to read it to you because I just couldn't, like, I put it up on Twitter because I was just so. This is the description. So, like, the head of mission, Polish head of mission, comes to Pharos. He had got the concession from the Sudanese government to excavate there. But there is a problem. There are still people living on his site. And so this is what he writes. So I quote, "So when I decided to take up excavations at Pharos, I immediately asked Jean Vercoutet, then director of the Department of Antiquities in Khartoum, now professor at the University of Lille, to evacuate this modest peasant settlement in order to be able to excavate the whole area of the hillock. The request was granted, and in February, so literally like after 3 months or something, we were able to begin digging at Pharos." And I'm like, okay, so wait, so you got a concession because you thought that was a good site to excavate. You asked the government of Khartoum, can you please evacuate these people from my site because I gotta excavate? And then they do that, and then you start at, this is how you write about it? Like, this is, and then in another catalog, he writes that the local people weren't very helpful because they didn't want to dig for him. And I'm like, yeah, you evicted them from their homeland. And then you're complaining they're not want to help you destroy their own homes? it's like this Israeli policy where they force Palestinians to destroy their own homes before they're expropriated. It's like, what do you think? Of course they won't work for you. And so, and this, this is a report. This is like, an official catalog of like the big murals from Maros, like the big works of art from Nubian culture. And there's a paragraph like this. I mean, it tells you a lot about the relationship between between scholars and Nubia and Nubians. Yes.
And community. And this is exactly what Minna and I were talking about also at some point yesterday. I can't remember. I think it was between the opening session and having Muhammad Omar join, was just like seeing the work of someone like Muhammad Omar in preserving the language, in revitalizing our endangered language, in walking from village to village, in recognizing that a Nubian discovered the Nubian letter. This is stuff that we simply don't hear about. And I do want to wait till Minna's connection comes back, because this is something that I do want her input in as far as what we're doing here with NubiaFest, because this is it. This is the space where we are creating. We're saying, it needs to be a co-creative process where the centered community, which is the Nubians, who are dealing with preserving their endangered heritage, need to center themselves. And this is a conversation I've had on multiple fronts on what does it look like to center community, and who does the centering? Because if a scholar is coming from outside trying to center my community in their studies, then you're ultimately saying you're trying to fit it. You're going to try and fit it into a narrative that you're just coming to prove. So if we're talking about archaeologists coming to Africa or going to the Middle East, they were coming to prove their version of the Bible and whatever it is, and bring proof to justify that, in their version, God is a white, blue-eyed, blonde man.
No, I fully agree with you, and that's why I also think that Minna really has a point, that we also actually probably need to decenter archaeology from this whole thing.
Yes, absolutely.
Since the baggage that it brings with it, the baggage of colonialism, the baggage of basically land grabbing, as far as I can, at the way I see it, like simply. Ultimately, land. I mean, if you read the way that he talks about pharaohs, then I would just say this is a land grab. Like, the Sudanese government has no right to give away an entire village to a Polish archaeologist, nor does he have the right to ask for the evacuation of these people. Like,
I mean, but again, it's not just limited to Sudan. This is also happening in Egypt.
Yes. But let me tell you.
Before we get into that community, that part of the conversation, there is a question here from when we first started, and I do want to recognize it. And I leave it to one of you in response. What is the relation between Nubian and Meroitic?
If this is a language question, I can say something about it. If this is a broader question, then it's more difficult.
Would you answer it from a language perspective? Mr. Mohammed Majdi El-Ishkiti.
He's asking about the language.
Nubian language, yes.
Then I can say something about this. So they are both part of the same language family. So that's their relation. They're very distant cousins. That's what it looks like right now. As you may know, Meroitic is not being completely deciphered, but from the limited amount of information that we currently have of this language and the limited amount of things that we understand, it looks like it is certainly related to the group of languages to which also Nubian, current Nubian languages such as Nubian belong, like as a distant cousin, basically. That's the answer.
Thank you. Now, I hope that answers the question to you. Please do let us know if you have more questions, and thank you. We appreciate the questions and your engagement. So if we were to transition back and going back to decentering archaeology, from the efforts of cultural heritage preservation. Minna, as an
I would like to
academic,
just say, yeah, that as an academic, because as an architect, I'm kind of working on Nubia. There are two existing fields of literature that I kind of am forced to deal with, which are either archaeology or anthropology. So these are the two fields that, like, that's where you find anything that is being said about Nubia. Not that they were not bullshit in either places, but they do engage with the issue. And one of them was this book, Nubian Twilight by Rex Keatings. I'm sure you're familiar with that, Vincent. And at the end of the book, there is this photo of a Nubian woman sitting on the ground, squatting on the ground, talking to the head of the excavating mission. And here is the comment next to it. Well, there was this. Of course, you can see the tone of it. There is this Nubian woman who came and said that the things that they're excavating are her ancestors and hers, and they cannot take it. But then they said no. Then she said, we can divide it half by half. And then they said, okay, if you want to be part of this, you have to pay us the cost of the mission. And she wouldn't leave until they kind of twisted her arm into, like, you have to pay for the mission, or like they didn't even take her seriously. And then they come back to us and says, because Nubian locals are not interested in their heritage. I call bullshit. Because my grandmother visited every single available grave of her ancestor to the last day of her living, and the thing that they were most regretting for leaving their ancestral land after displacement is leaving their dead. So people who keep spatial connection to their dead over all these generations are not interested in their ancestors from before that. And then you have, when they show that interest, you ridicule it. And you basically flex your financial muscle and exclude her from the process, and then eventually come back to us and say this. And I would say even contemporary archaeologists, I have heard people call Nubians thieves. I have heard people. You can hear all these colonial narratives, and then these French archaeologists would go into Spanish archaeologists would go and dig next to West Aswan and basically have Nubians serve them for money. So now we're going to be their servants unless they until they get into the belly of our land and get our ancestors out and take them with them while they leave. But if we get there and go near that, they have a state officer and a troop behind, just waiting over a phone call to come and oppress whatever we would like to say. And if we go near these excavation sites ourselves, we would be called thieves. So the whole narrative that archaeology operates upon, Nubian archaeology operates upon now, that Nubians are not interested is in Nubian archaeology, is completely bullshit, because they also make sure that none even of the workers are Nubian. So and I got in some debates lately with sorry, we should not curse. So with archaeologists, and somebody was saying, well, I was wondering, where are the people of color in Nubian studies? And I was thinking, you were not baffled by the fact there are no Nubian in the Nubian studies, and you are now asking where are the other people of color from other places around the world? You're not, like, if you're not bothered by the fact that are not actual Nubians. And of course, because we all look the same to them, if there is a Nubian, if there is an Egyptian archaeologist, they think they have a local with them, because also Egyptians claim Nubian as theirs. So this fact that this myth that they have created around Nubian archaeology to make sure that they exclude us, not just, Vincent, the direct erasure, not just the direct exclusion, like just evacuating an entire village, but right. Even when we make that effort forward, we get pushed back. Nobody could ever say Nubian monuments after Abdel Nasser took took on the High Dam project. It cannot, it's Egyptian monuments. These are not Nubian monuments until then some movement came after in the 90s with the Aga Khan and the Aga Khan powers that pushed a bit, and we all know the story of the Aga Khan and trying to bring the word, the term Nubia back into exposure, and had remember that there is something called Nubia, and now we have the Nubia Museum, which the naming of which was a problem, by the way. It was not something, it was supposed to be the Mubarak Museum, but then it was another discussion.
Which is a whole other dimension on its own. This museum and the fact that, and also, sorry to interrupt you, Minna, but when you said that, I remembered going to that museum and seeing, you know, how it was gracefully opened by Hosni Mubarak, blah, blah, blah. But then I remember when they had the Claude Rillet language workshops in that museum, and to clear the way for the photo shoot that, look, we have foreigners coming and holding these great academic workshops for Nubian languages, blah, 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 blah. They cleared out the entire street of Nubian women who are sat there selling their accessories, their artifacts. They were cleared out, and not there's no compensation. Of course, there's no compensation. There's no order. They're just shooing them like they were mopping the streets.
But this is how they see us, as a contamination of their pure spaces. This is how the head of the head of the archaeology commission in Faras, as you were saying, Vincent. So Nubians, this is how the excavation that was mentioned in Rick Keating's book. So Nubians, we are just a contamination in their pure space, in the imagined space in their head, and then they become so invested in necropolitics, and this is the issue with archaeologists. They cannot live without death. Not just that they deal in the dead, is that when the living appear, it disrupts that place for them. Just to hone in on this issue with archaeology, they live in necropolitics. It's not that just
because if the live is part of the study of the dead, then the live will hold them accountable in what they say. If they're just studying the dead won't rise and tell them what you're saying is wrong. But if you are engaging the live and the element of continuity of the dead that you are studying, then it becomes a problem.
That's not what they are interested in, because they would like to build a narrative. And why would they build a narrative exists?
That's what I'm saying. I don't know. The internet is
the story needs to end so that they can.
No, we're saying the same thing. I think the tech gremlins are just getting in the way.
Yeah.
I know that's not what they're interested in, but that's what I'm saying. They are interested in controlling a particular narrative of people, of a group that is no longer present. So whatever they say about the dead is gonna go uncontested, basically. But if you have the descendants of said people coming and saying, we call bullshit on what you're doing, then it becomes a problem. And I want to go back to your comment on contamination, because that rang a very loud bell in my ear. So Vincent and I met for the first time. I mean, we were in touch via Twitter, and then these are one of the positives of social media. There are plenty negatives, but meeting Vincent and connecting with him over Twitter was definitely one of the positives. And we physically met at the Nubia, the International Conference for Nubian Studies in Paris, which was held at the Louvre. And one of the things, and there's the number of first of all, the number of Nubians who were there was just abysmal. And that's a whole other discussion I'm hoping we're going to get into later on this week. But the presence of Black scholars, Black academics in the study of Nubia, I think I don't think we passed 13 in total, if I'm being very, very, very honest. Yes. Some of them went on a tour of Black Paris, the Black history of Paris. And in learning the roots of what Paris is called and So this was, again, almost 4 years ago, 3 years ago now. And last 2 months ago, I was sitting and I was having a conversation with an older French gentleman. And we're talking about Egypt and Africa and heritage. And I brought up that, oh, I heard that Paris was actually a tribute to the goddess Isis. You know, it was Par Isis. And then the second is just kind of wandered off. Before I could finish that sentence, it was so categorically and quickly rejected. And what was said to that was that this was an attempt to take away from the nobility of the French by trying to associate us to Africa. Just like, what? Are you saying this with a straight face to me? Like, I didn't want to make a scene, obviously, but I was just in shock. And now when you're saying that, ultimately, this is what Nubians are viewed as in these spaces. Because even when you're having conversations with so-called progressive Nubiologists and progressive scholars, and you're saying, hold space for Nubian communities to come and have these conversations, even if we're talking about like the International Conference for Nubian Studies, that was, what, a 5-day conference, Vincent? The only part where community came into the picture was the last day of the conference. And it was so sporadic. And it was not run by Nubians.
And not because we don't exist. They reject us. They reject submissions from people that they don't deem appropriate. So they keep their, and then sometimes they just maybe find a couple of tokens to add in, not to devalue any of the work by Nubians who get to stand on that stage and speak in their voices. But they don't think that these conferences do not deliberately reject scholars that are offering anything outside the narratives they approve of.
Yeah, completely. Again, when we say no Nubia, and this is something, and that's the theme for NubiaFest, and it's a play. Again, we repeat, it's a play on those who say there is no Nubia. Right? When we say, what does knowing Nubia mean, and how do people get to know Nubia if you're not going to engage with Nubians? If the books that are available on Nubia are predominantly not written by Nubians, not accessible to Nubians, for Nubians to know whether it's true or not, and by accessible, it can be for paywalls or it can be the language barrier, how do people get to know Nubia if they're not engaging with Nubians? Like, what role does academia hold, and what role does the community hold, and where is that middle ground? And just to clarify, this isn't taking away from recognizing that we have Nubians in our midst who are contributing to the erasure of our heritage, that are complicit and complacent in this process. That's not to take away from that. And it's very important that Nubians acknowledge this.
Yeah, but this is normal in colonized people. You become colonized by force to be complicit in your own demise. It's not that somebody just oppresses you. It's that they implement systems of self-oppression and self-governance. So this, I am not surprised by this. So when you hear some people saying, well, this is not ours, or this is we have been always Muslim, or we have been always Sudanese or Egyptian, or these are all completely understandable to me. To answer your question, Dima, I just would like to say there's no middle ground. Academics should stop bullshitting and stop cut their crap and know that, situate themselves and know what they're working for. Are we working for our 10-year profiles, European funders, and whatever, head of department, chair of department, or are we really committed to produce knowledge for Nubians and for Nubia? And if it's the former, they should just find something else to work in instead of producing us as their subject, because we are not their subject, we are not their Negroes. If it's the latter, though, I think there is a lot of work to be done on creating kind of constitutions and rules of practice and codes of practice to see how really academia as a paid place or a place with resources that can help communities and can be part of the community, not engage with the community, be part of the community that produces this kind of knowledge and serve that Nubian interest instead of serving funders' interest, because most funders are probably either white or state agents, right? Or states.
Or institutions, or because I mean you have UNESCO giving funding. I mean, it's funded by states, sure, but like you have a so-called international multilateral institution, blah, 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 that is providing the funding for capacity building and cultural heritage preservation. But then you also have UNESCO completely washing its hands of the continued implication of the forced displacement of Nubians. And not just that, you have them repeating the same disaster now to our Maasai family in the Ngorongoro region in Tanzania. Under the guise of preservation, right now as we speak, more than 80,000 Maasai people have to leave their land in the Ngorongoro region so that it can be preserved, natural preserve. But what they're not recognizing is that, one, that goes against an agreement that was already placed. Two, nature follows these people. They're pastoralists. That's what they do. Nature follows them wherever they go. And three, you're supporting Tanzania to displace these people. Why? To make room for the Arabs so that they can go have their hunting season. So we can't rely on these institutions. We can't rely on these academics. But when we talk about academics being part of the community, and this is a conversation that we've had. There's it's an NSF-funded project between maybe 4 universities, and the question was, we were having this conversation about what the centering community look like, and do academics force themselves? Like, do we just go into Nubia and say, look, we're here? But even that is an invasion of privacy. Even that is you coming as like, if Nubians aren't telling you to come, if Nubians aren't showing you the way, if you're not being welcomed by the Nubians, your presence is not desired there. But if you come, you bring your team, you have no interest in investing in this community, you have no interest in reciprocating knowledge with this community, what are we going, where? How are you preserving anything?
This then takes us to the point of epistemic positionality, because it's not just about being brought in. And I know that we are no longer at. Can you hear me, guys?
Yes. Yes.
It's not that. How do I say? It's not just about who are going to come in there, come here. And I know our discussions about Nubian by lineage, Nubian by love is not here, but this is really relevant to this. The fact that it's not about people who are going to be nice to us, or somebody who had a Nubian friend, I have a Nubian friend kind of, and then you can go and extract knowledge and extract, data so that you can go write a thesis somewhere and get a degree and advance in your career. But then about producing knowledge, Nubian knowledge in Nubian fields of meaning, not to go look at a house and impose a hierarchy in a horizontal system. that did not have hierarchies. Not this, the fact that these kind of knowledge is being produced is not just about them being nice and polite to us and asking us for permission, but also not imposing their existential ontological structures on the way we live, we have lived, and we continue living. You know, and this becomes also back to the idea that archaeologists think they are exact science. How is it an exact science? You don't even engage within the Nubian field of meaning. You don't even know what it means to die for Nubians. Not just the translation of the word, but what does it mean to die? And then with that, what does it mean to be dead for 1,000 years and underground to Nubians? And then with that would then, you know, inform that practice. So this is, I know it's a kind of a stupidly complicated word, but just to be positioned in Nubian field of meaning. And that's what I mean by epistemic positionality. It's not just they produce knowledge by being nice to us, and they don't erase us, kill us, and, you know, send us out of our homes and displace us for their campaigns. But also, when they work on Nubia, they work within a Nubian field of meaning. And to do that, you have to do something like what Vincent is doing, which is dedicate his life to what is Nubian and understanding what is Nubian and becoming Nubian by love. And this not just challenges what knowledge means, but also challenges what identity structures that are imposed on us are. So we don't just challenge how we produce knowledge, we also challenge how identity is constructed. Because this is where we stand. That's our field of meaning. This is how we actualize our world making dreams and possibilities.
But this is also
it's
also how it turns into this vicious circle. Again, we started this conversation by saying that Nubians aren't being engaged in these efforts, archaeological or otherwise, of producing this knowledge. And I don't even know if producing knowledge is the way, because the knowledge is there, it's always been there, and there's nothing new under the sun. You are extracting it, interpreting it, and adding your glaze on it and putting it out there. But it goes and it circles now with the conversation or the debate of the return of the icons, in that Nubians specifically, but Africans at large, are not equipped to look after their heritage, are not equipped to look after these artifacts. And so therefore it is...
But why is that? Why is that? Because like the British Museum continues to extract value from these monuments in order to preserve them. So like when you put them somewhere else, they will generate that revenue somewhere else. Yeah, I mean, it's a vicious circle. Like, yeah, you don't have the knowledge to preserve these monuments and therefore we're not giving them back. No, that's not how it works. You stole them, you give them back, you provide the knowledge how to preserve them for free, because that's the least thing that you owe for actually stealing the fucking things in the first place.
Continuing to steal. Continue to steal.
I mean, like, again, to come back to that Farah's catalog. In that catalog, he describes how they deal with these murals. He said, yeah, well, at the end of the season, there comes a time when we have to divide. And the Sudanese government comes to my excavations and we decided health. And it's really sad because, like, I excavated them and, you know, like, they're my babies. I literally kind of said they're my babies, and it's really difficult to give them away because I feel they're kind of mine. It's like, you're the last person whose murals these are. Like, literally the last person on the world who should have any claim on anything that comes out of their ground. And then, like, it's like the facility with which these things are set without any sort of reflection. That's just so demotivating.
Yeah.
To say the least. To say the least, because there seems to be such a, I mean, and I'm sorry, like, Minna, you have already said this much better than I have, but to be confronted in your own, archaeology is not even my field for that matter, to be confronted within academia with the way that these things continue to persist it's intense. I mean, linguists have a whole different set of problems. I mean, it's not that linguists are. No. I mean, they they go with the whole Bible thing. So that, which still continues right away. I mean, like the major organizations involved in language research in Sudan are basically Christian missionary organizations under, like, I really shouldn't say this, but they kind of are, like, so,
Yeah, but you know what? This is it becomes this something that we cannot really stop doing, because they're not going to stop doing it. As much as there is cultural capital in our areas, they're going to keep evacuating it. The more we produce, the more they're going to suck out of us. Even if it's not going to stop. So we need to kind of put a stop to that. And even the fact that it doesn't just touch on a theoretical level or like on a state level, it touches those in the ground. Go ask somebody in West Aswan. Go ask somebody in West Sahel. Go listen to the older ladies in Gustul and Edindan. What has happened in the years before displacement, and how people were rushing to excavate, like rushing to save all these Nubian things, while all these Nubian houses are going to be inundated in a matter of months. And it's going to go on and on and on and on. And the fact that Nubia has to stay at this position of cultural serfdom to Egypt, Sudan, or even the global heritage construction that is the UNESCO global heritage, blah blah blah, is in itself touches you in your village, in your house. When you have to now serve and feed the French archaeologists who are coming in to literally steal your ancestors' goods and treasures and take them to France or whatever. So it really touches us on that level, and the fact that they redline our economy around it, because there are things that we can't do in this area. There are things that we can't do around these villages because archaeologists need to safeguard the places they're going to steal. It's insane if you put this in a context of stealing, that somebody's taking something that is not theirs. How much can you protect a thief? How much can you protect a thief? And how can archaeologists now, for example, start talking about decolonization? Like, how can you start talking about decolonization without engaging with this? You find all these very empty and rhetorical texts about decolonizing archaeology. But yeah, anyways,
I completely agree with you that is by and large a rhetorical exercise, and it's not happening. I mean, if you in any Hollywood narrative, let's say like my village is about to be overrun by an enemy, like there are a few people left there, like over my dead body will I leave this place, and for sure, like in any type of historical heroic Western narrative, people never leave their place, and like I'd rather have everything go down with me, including my graveyard, including my house, including everything I have, rather than that anyone else gets it. And so I'm sorry, like, how is it so difficult to imagine that other people would feel exactly the same way? Like, do you really think that, saving a church, a cathedral from like 1,000 years old is of any concern for somebody who is about to literally be evicted from the land on which they've lived for generations? Like to hell with it. I can totally, like, this is none of your concern even. Like, if you can do something, then you should probably prevent the dam from being built. That's probably how you can be useful, not excavating the fucking thing. So I always, it also feels like there's like this really, really profound lack of empathy. Like a profound lack of empathy. Like, I mean, I know how I would respond to a similar situation, and it would definitely not be welcoming the archaeologist.
And let's not forget, Vincent, that at the point of building the high dam, Nubians have been submerged at night in their sleep by the low dam thrice. So the fact that you're talking to people who are just like being displaced now and have not considered dismantling a building rock by rock and taking it with them, while they were not even allowed to take we're not allowed to take their animals with them. They were taken away, and that's another story. But that they were not allowed to take their goods with them and the parts of their house with them. And you tell them, why are you not interested in this? And forgetting that they have been submerged by water in 1933, 1912, and 1902 is just an omission of history. Those people thought, at least this time we get this place without being killed. At least this time there is a dam. And at least there's land, because the land was taken since the turn of the century by the Nile, the water of the low dam. All the men are working as servants in urban cities in Egypt, within a reproduction of slave master dynamics between black people and lighter skinned people. And you tell them at this moment, you were not thinking and you're not interested, and forgetting that those people are literally running away from death. They're literally, what they have been through was literal death. Villages like the ones in the north, the Kunuz villages, they have drastic stories. My late grandfather wrote the accounts of his mother and his grandmother in the two heightenings of the dam, and it's horror stories, and these histories are being erased. They're not thinking about them, and they try to. They only allow us to start talking about our history at the point of the dam. We are only allowed to have issues with the dam. We're not allowed to even at that point, because sometimes people say even Nubians agreed to displacement by the dam. Sure, because their other option, knowing the state, is being killed in place. So of course they're going to agree to move. Especially when you tell them, don't worry, we're going to give you land, we're going to give you electricity, we're going to give you modernism, we're going to give you the good life. Trust us, this land doesn't have anything for you anymore. So, and then you ask them at that moment, when a village is basically all women, because all men are working in urban centers, and they are struggling to make ends meet, and they are struggling to sustain their village and their what left out of their land. And you tell them, what, you were not interested in biology and in a building, and even in that moment they were interested and they tried, and you ridiculed them and you erased them and you never let their voices come out. So it really is it really is a gross misrepresentation of what happened to Nubians during the 20th century.
To say the very least, but I do want to be mindful of time. And I know, Vincent, it's ridiculous o'clock where you are, and I'm grateful that you're taking the time. But I do want us to tap into the conversation of what heritage preservation looks like in a digital age, which cannot recognize, refuses to recognize the language of and the means of communication of knowledge bearers of a society. As someone who is working with Nubian typeface, fonts, the dictionary that you were talking about earlier today. And if you've missed this discussion, you can find it on our YouTube channel and our Facebook channel at NubiaFEST2020. But what does that look like? And what role, again, does each play? The community, academia, and technology in this digital space that has no room?
Oh, Dima, it's such a difficult question. And you're right, it's late and my brain is slowly tuning out. So at some point I will have to physically tune out, because I'm not sure how intensive I can do this for much longer. But I mean, it's first of all, I have to say that I am guilty as charged. Like I don't speak Nubian, I don't speak Andandi, or at least it's very rudimentary. My Arabic is very rudimentary too.
Wait, you speak Arabic?
I mean, I understand like 2-3 words.
I
But also because I'm basically exposed. I mean, like if you talk Arabic around me all the time, then obviously like I'm gonna
Exposed is
pick
the
up.
correct terminology here. You know. Moving right along.
I had this wonderful time when I was visiting Aswan, and I went with a friend to Komombo to visit some Kenzi scholars who were working in their villages on their own languages. And we were sitting over dinner, and after half an hour, I was like, okay, I can get a hang of this. I can get a hang of Kenzi. Like, I mean, I know old Nubian, so it's like, it's as if I know medieval Latin and somebody's trying to speak Italian to me. So like at some point you're like, okay, I can slowly start to deal with this. If I would be able to live here for a couple of months, it should be fine. So and which I would love to do. I mean, there would be nothing else I'd love to do. But to come back to your question, Dima, digital technology has the potential of making the playing field more even, potentially. But it has also the potential to create large divides amongst those who have access and amongst those who don't. Right? There have been initiatives such as the Nubia app, for example, or the Kickstarter for the book projects, Gary Fairomir, that have leveraged digital technologies in order to spread knowledge of Nubian language and culture back to the community, which I think is absolutely fantastic and is absolutely the way to do it. I would like to come back to a point that Minna made some time ago, which is that it is rather than relying on technology, I think technology is just a tool, right? It's you can use it. The fact that there are no clear ethical guidelines, that there are no clear standards in our field, academic field, is an enormous problem. I mean, the ISNS doesn't have any ethical guidelines on how to even engage in an archaeological project. I find this very difficult to understand. It also makes, I think, such organizations very vulnerable to the politics of the day and whatever people, and not necessarily politics, but the power of the day. And I mean, and that's not only what you see in this whole discourse of Sudan studies and how that developed, but also how the response, much more recent, of the Nubiological community was in the context of the Sudanese revolution, which was one of absolutely deafening silence, except for the statement that we wrote together for the Union of Nubian Studies, which literally was the only organization, and a very informal and loose organization at that, with very little actual power.
That's what I was going to. It's not one that is allowed that access or granted that stature like some of the other archaeological units.
But I think
buildings upon buildings.
Well,
but
first of all, I mean,
among the Nubians, that's where the weight is. And
but I think that's also a choice, right? I mean, it's a choice. Yeah. Like, first of all, we're not an archaeological organization. I don't even know who we is when we say we. But I think that's also what makes it work. I hate power. I hate bureaucracies. I hate these types of structures, and I don't want to be in them, and nor do I want to create them. And so I think the way that the Union for Nubian Studies works, which is rather a totally anarchist collection of people that anyone anyone who wants to be the Union of Nubian Studies, like, I'm fine with that. Like, I really don't, just go for it. And any project that you have that you want to put into it, we'll just put it. And I think, and same with NubiaFest, right? I think NubiaFest operates kind of in the same spirit. That allows you to think about things like ethics, I think, in a much more pure way, because you're unencumbered by vested interests. At the same time, we're powerless in the sense of actually enforcing things. But I do believe.
Are we?
Well, no, that's what I was about to refer to Gramsci, because, like, I do believe that politics is downstream from culture. So like, if we I really believe in just doing things and doing them so often that they become impossible to ignore, rather than being on the inside of an organization and trying to change things, because I've never seen that work. I'd rather be outside the organization and just do things and do them so well and exuberantly that it becomes impossible to do things in another way, because it's just kind of lame. That's kind of the way that I've always tried to do things. I'm sorry, I sidetracked on your question.
No, it's actually quite perfect. And I do want to go back to the two examples that you gave of the efforts that are not just using technology as a tool, but the efforts that are going towards the preservation of this heritage specifically.
But before you do that, because I also see in a discussion that, I mean, we've been talking all the time in English. So maybe I should go and you should continue the conversation and maybe switch languages also for those who have been tolerating us for so long speaking, in a language that may not be theirs.
I appreciate the sentiment as ever. Recognize your inclusivity and give thanks to it, and forever grateful. Yes, to be continued, because there's more of that to continue. I do want to build on your point before you leave and connect it to what Minna was saying, in that Nubians are actively doing, although they are, occupied with their abysmal economic conditions and all the different ways that their livelihoods are being attacked on all fronts, in that the examples that you have given for efforts for cultural heritage preservations were spearheaded by Nubians, were started by Nubians, and were supported by academics on their own accords, but with or without the support of the academics. They had started that. They have planted that seed. They have gone with that. And I can say the same with my experience with the Nubia initiative as well, in that that's not to say we won't get pushback. We will be getting pushback. We'll get pushback from all sides, whether it's from the governments or from our communities or from the academic communities, where you'll be ridiculed and put to the side. But it is to recognize and reiterate Minna's point, is that we're here. We've been here. We continue to push to be here. And then to add and connect to your point, we just need to do it often and loud enough that it becomes impossible to ignore. And that's the part that gets tiring. And I will pause here and have Minna weigh in, and then give you the last remarks before you go and call it a night on your end. And tomorrow,
I honestly don't need any less remarks. I think you have summarized this very well.
Thank you.
And I am going to go because I am dead.
What time is it there? Just for balance, what time is it there?
It's 11:30, and I've been in the library since like early in the morning, so I'm done.
Yes. Yes, go. Thank you.
Thank you, Dima. Thank you, Minna. It was wonderful as always, and to be continued.
Yes. We have a full week.
Oh my God.
Good night.
Good night.
So we're concluding here. Can I conclude this in Arabic?
لا ما احنا we're not لسه concluding لأنه لسه we need to ask what this role is. what this role is from a community perspective. For how do
what do you mean the community itself? The community is doing, Dima. There is a big community of Nubians who are working. The Nubian clubs in associations in Egypt, in Cairo, the Nubian association all over the world, the Nubian association in Paris, the Nubian association in Kuwait, the Nubian association in Saudi Arabia, and all of them, each of them, they do
in silos. شغالين احنا ما بنقولش ان هم
مش شغالين. No, they're not in silos. No, they're not in silos. They have been redlined, to the knowledge itself have been excluded by formal academia that only recognizes knowledge that has been baptized by formal academia. They are not in silos, because I know them. I have learned from them. I have heard them because I come from the community. I was born and raised in a displacement village, so I know those people. When I go to Cairo, these are my people in Cairo. When I travel to Europe, I go to my people in Paris, and I go to my people in Amsterdam, and when I go there, to my people in other places when I travel. What I'm telling you is that the production of knowledge, the production of Nubian knowledge has never stopped. The community is working. The community, even your grandmothers at home are piling up old photographs and old pieces of jewelry and all these things to preserve for their descendants. My grandmother has saved me her china, her gold, because I need to give them to my daughter and these need to live. So خلينا نقلب الموضوع بالعربي لانه الموضوع ده مهم. ايه دور اول حاجه؟ ما ينفعش نقول ايه دور المجتمع النوبي في الحفاظ على التراث النوبي. احنا عارفين اول حاجه لو بدأنا عند نقطه اللغه، واحنا عارفين انه مثلا في مشاكل كتيره بتخلي الام النوبيه تقول لعيالها ما تتعلموش نوبي، تعلموا عربي بدل النوبي. واحنا عارفين انه ده مش بس عشان هي ما بتحبش اصلها،
طبعا
ده جاي من ضغوطات ثقافيه كبيره جدا بتقول لها انتي وعيالك وعيال عيالك ما لهمش مكان، ما لهمش اي فرصه للحراك، يعني لاي نمو اقتصادي في حياتهم، الا لو كانوا بيتكلموا عربي. مش اي عربي زي الجماعه بتوع القاهره، زي ما انا بكلمك كده، مش العربي بتاعنا بتاع البلد اللي شكله عربي بتاع، عارفه، بتاع ناس القريه. فانت عندك في ضغوطات مهوله، ومع ذلك كل قريه عندها بتعمل شكل من اشكال الحفاظ. كل بيت نوبي في متحف، كل بيت نوبي في التهجير في متحف. انا من كباحثه في التهجير ما اقدرش اروح واقول للناس اهو دوركم، دور المجتمع. انا ما اقدرش غير اني اقول ان الاكاديميه مش بس مقصره، دي كمان مجحفه. الاكاديميه ما بتعتبرش اي حاجه.
لا معلش شويه عليا بالعربي، انت عارفه العربي is not my language.
يعني يعني الاكاديميه مش بس مثلا الأكاديمية مش بس إنها ما بتحطش الموارد، لأنه دراسة تاريخنا اللي يهمنا، التاريخ اللي يهمنا والقصة اللي تهمنا ما تهمهمش، وفي نفس الوقت اللي احنا بندرسه وبنحطه على الورق وبنحطه في الأغنية وبنحطه في القصة، طالما ما لم يتم إنتاجه وسط الأكاديمية، مش بس وسط الأكاديمية، بالميثودولوجي، بمنهجيات الأكاديمية، يبقى ما يعتبرش معرفة. يبقى ما نعتبروش معرفة، ما بنحترموش، ما بنديلوش قيمة، ما بنديلوش وزن. بالتالي طالما ما بنديلوش قيمة، ما بنديلوش وزن، يبقى مالوش مكان في الاقتصاد الثقافي. فاهمه قصدي؟
لا انا معاكي. طب انا عايزه اوضح سؤالي، لانه هو سؤالي مش هجوم باي طريقه او كريتيسيزم باي طريقه على الكوميونتي النوبي. انا ما بتكلمش على المجتمع النوبي من جهه تقصير على حفاظنا على التاريخ او التراث النوبي، مع انه عشان نكون صراحه we can always do more، دايما في مكان انه احنا نعمل اكتر. بس انا بتكلم لانه اوكي من وجهه نظر the Nubia Initiative، احنا مبادره كونت من 2 نوبيات دايسبورا، لا عارفين اللغة النوبية، لا عارفين الثقافة والتاريخ النوبي، لا عايشين في النوبة نفسها. أنا أول مرة أروح بلدي السنة اللي فاتت. أوكي، أنا لما بسأل السؤال ده أنا بسأل for the larger Nubian communities, whether it's continental mainland Nubians, if you will, or the diaspora Nubians. أنا بسأل from a perspective of يعني إحنا مثلا we have this space هنا، السبيس ده اللي موجود اللي هو نوبيا فيست.
طب خلينا اكلم حد بقى معين، طالما احنا مش بنتكلمش عن المجتمع النوبي. المجتمع النوبي دول ملايين من النوبيين في اشكال مختلفه من الشتات، حتى اللي في التهجير قاعد في مصر ده شتات برضه، لان دي مش بلدنا الاصليه. فاحنا في اشكال مختلفه من الشتات ومن من الضغوطات الاقتصاديه والاجتماعيه والثقافيه على حسب البلد اللي احنا فيها. خليني اقول لك مين النوبيين اللي ما عايز اكلمهم. الناس those who made it، الناس اللي عرفوا يخشوا جامعه وبيعملوا ماجستير واشتغلوا وارتاحوا وهاجروا ودخلوا الطبقه الوسطى والطبقه الاعلى من الوسطى. احنا محتاجين ناخد كل الموارد اللي احنا عرفنا ناخدها دي، ونعرف ان احنا نسبه قليله جدا من النوبيين. ما فيش، روحي قرى التهجير، روحي القرى بتاعتك، شوفي كم واحد بيلحق يخش الجامعه في كل قريه، نسبتهم قد ايه. وروحي القاهره في اي مدرسه كلهم بيدخلوا الجامعه، الجامعه متاحه ليهم. بس احنا بالنسبه لنا معظم الناس عندنا مستقبلها هي انها هتتجوز تقعد في البيت كبنت وهيروح يشتغل في الخليج كراجل. في كده من طرق من الظلام هي الوحيده المتاحه لينا، واللي بيعرف يخرج منها واللي بيعرف يتسلسل كده ويعرف يعمل دراسه ولا يعمل حاجه، ده بقى دوره انه ياخد اي موارد عرف ياخدها من الانظمه المجحفه دي ويرجع يديها للمجتمع تاني. فلو عرفتوا تعملوا ماجستير خلي رسالتك على النوبة، لو عرفت تعمل دكتوراه اشتغل على النوبة، لو عرفت تشتغل بس ما عندك شويه فلوس حاول تدي بلدك تاني، حاول تشوف الجمعيه بتاعتك فين وتدفع وابقى جزء من الجمعيه وادفع مصاريف الجمعيه، وبرده بس برده لو انت عندك دخل زايد اتبرع لجمعيتك. لو انت باحث او باحثه وبتدور على الناس اللي بتذاكر زيك تعالى دور على مجموعات زي دي، النوبيا انيشيتيف، احنا موجودين كلمونا. انا بدور على اي حد شغال في عن النوبه وعن اي مشاكل النوبه، عن اي مشكله من مشاكل النوبه لو عايزين اي مساعده. وانا كمان هيبقى عندي اسئله للناس اللي من القرى الثانيه، للناس اللي من الاماكن الثانيه، اكيد هيبقى عندهم معارف انا كمان هستفيد منها، نتجمع على بعض. بس الموارد هي دي مشكلتي، اني اجي على مجتمع ما عندوش موارد واقول له يلا دورك. يعني احنا يا ديما ماشي او قدام عيني عمتي وانا كنت قاعده معاهم جالنا الناس قالوا لنا يلا نعملوا منتجات نوبيه وهنبيعوا في السوق السياحي ماشي، واتسرقنا. بعدين لما شويه بشويه لما المنتجات دي قالوا لنا لا احنا هنعلمكم ماركتينج ماشي، وات واز فيري كوندسندنج ان بيبصوا لنا على اننا ناس ما بنفهمش حاجه. طيب ماشي يا عم. وبعدين لما المجتمع ولا السوق زهقت من المنتج اللي احنا بننتجه خلاص هرميكي انت والماده الخام اللي عندك والدين اللي انت كونتيه عشان تحاولي تدخلي اقتصادهم. انت بتتكلمي في انه حتى المحاولات اللي كان شكلها انها بتدعم المجتمع النتائج بتاعتها كانت نتائج مجحفه، كانت نتائج مؤذيه للمجتمع. فالحاجه الحاجه اللي احنا نقدر نعملها هي الموارد، اذا كانت موارد معرفيه، اذا كانت موارد ماليه، اذا كانت موارد ثقافيه. يعني احنا بقى خلاص بقيت الدكتوره فلانه والدكتوره علينا ارجع لبلدك الدكتوره فلانه ارجعي لبلدك الدكتوره ديما بنت كباجه، عشان
ودي حاجه ثانيه، ودي حاجه ثانيه لازم نتكلم عليها في دور المجتمع. انا واحده دلوقتي معايا دكتوراه في سياسه السودان الخارجيه، ومعايا في انترناشونال ليجيتيمسي. اوكي، اجي ان انا اقول اوكي انا سايبه I'm leaving واشنطن دي سي وماشيه راجعه بلدي، راجعه البلد، مش حتى انا يعني مش راجعه السودان اروح اقعد في الخرطوم، انا ماشيه البلد في النوبه في كباجه. البوش باك اللي بيجي من الاهل انه انت رايحه تعملي ايه. انا مش بتكلم على اهلي انه بير سي، بس this is حتى لما بوصل البلد ناس البلد بيسالوني انت جايه تعملي ايه؟ انت بجد انت سايبه هناك وجايه هنا؟ طب ما هو اوكي and this is
عشان
strong.
انت خرجتي من القبور دي اللي مرجعك تاني، فاهمه قصدي؟ بس برضه يا ديما ماشي، هنقول لهم احنا عارفين، بس على قد ما هنقدر هنبقى هنا، على قد ما هنقدر هنبعت هنا، على قد ما هنقدر هنكون جزء من الاقتصاد بتاعنا، على قد ما نقدر هنغذيه. بس دي يعني انا بالنسبه لي كنوبيين هي دي الفئه الوحيده اقدر اتكلم معاها. طبعا في صح امهات بتقول لعيالها ما تتكلموش نوبي، بس في برضو حاجات تفرح، وفي ناس في عيال قد كده في البلد بتتكلم نوبي احسن مني ومنك، وفي initiatives ومع وفي مبادرات قصدي، ومع عصرة المكان وعصرة الاقتصاد والضغوطات الموجودة دي كلها، النوبيين برضو بيعملوا كده، وده دورنا احنا نتجمع عليهم. اللي انا بقى شايفة انه عليهم الحمل الاكبر في اللحظة اللي هيقالوا فيها احنا عايزين نشتغل عن النوبة هم الاكاديميين، وانا بتكلم كواحدة في المجتمع ده. انا بالنسبة لي الحمل الاكبر ليه؟ لانه عندهم موارد، لان هم بيستفيدوا، هم literally حرفيا الناس دي بتيجي بتاخد منك المعرفه وبتحول المعرفه دي لفلوس، بتحول المعرفه دي لتمويل مشروعهم الجاي، بتحول المعرفه دي للشغلانه الجايه، بتحول المعرفه دي لترقيه من مدرس مساعد لمدرس. كل المعرفه اللي بيجوا يمتصوها مننا كده، عارفه الاكستراكشن دوت، استخراج اللي بيجوا يعملوه في قرانا، قال يعني بيدرسوا النوبة عشان هم حلوين ومش عارف والكلام ده كله، وبيحبوا النوبيين. بنسمع الحاجات دي كلها بتترجم بالنسبه لهم لموارد. ايه بقى الموارد اللي هم جاي بيدوها لنا؟ احنا خدنا ايه من كده؟ احنا خدنا ايه من كده؟ وهم كمان بياخدوا القصه بتاعتنا ويكتبوها بصوتهم مش بصوتنا، بياخدوا القصه بتاعتنا. انتي مقفوله؟ الصوت عندك مقفول يا ديما؟
هو ده بالظبط اللي كنت بفكر فيه اول ما قريت الكومنت ده من الاستاذ محمد. نحن محتاجين نعرف
بالظبط يا استاذ محمد، بالظبط. ومش بس الاكاديميين محتاجين يعملوا دور دلوقتي، الاكاديميين محتاجين يصلحوا من نفسهم الاول ويعرفوا دورهم الاستعماري، ويخرجوا من الدور الاستعماري ده ويشتغلوا فعلا عن النوبه لخدمه النوبيين والخدمه مصلحه النوبيين وخدمه مستقبل النوبيين الاقتصادي والثقافي والاجتماعي، وبعد كده يجوا يشتغلوا وسطنا. هو ده اللي انا قصدي عليه. انا ما اقدرش دلوقتي اقف واقول مجتمعي اللي طلعان عينه انت هتعمل ايه للنوبه. اقدر اقول لاولاد عمامي وولاد خالاتي وناسنا شو they made it a bit، عارفه اللي هم وصلوا لحاجه. احنا محتاجين نشتغل ونلاقي بعض ونبعت لبلدنا موارد بكل اشكالها، لكن اللي محتاجين فعلا يعملوا كل الشغل المهم دلوقتي في نفسهم قبل ما يجوا لنا، يخرجوا من عندنا يروحوا يشتغلوا على نفسهم ويرجعوا لنا تاني لو عايزين يشتغلوا عندنا، هم الاكاديميين. ده بصراحه البوزيشن بتاعي من الموضوع ده. اما المجتمع النوبي في حد
مهم قوي ان احنا نحدد ان قصدنا الاكاديميين النوبيين. كل مره within this context احنا بنتكلم
اكاديميين النوبيين والاكاديميين اللي عايزين يشتغلوا على النوبه. الاكاديمي النوبي او الاكاديمي اللي عايز يشتغل على النوبه. الاكاديمي النوبي ده معناه انه راح عمل ماجستير ودكتوراه، ده لازم يرجع لبلد، لازم يرجع لبلده حاجه، اذا كانت حاجه يعني مكتوبه او على شكل موارد ماليه او على شكل حاجات كتير. بس الاكاديمي النوبي ده احنا عارفينه. بس الاكاديمي اللي مش نوبي وعايز يشتغل عن النوبه ده محتاج يشتغل على نفسه كتير جدا، وقبل ما يجي عندنا يعرف دوره الاستعماري ويعرف دور الادوار الكتير اللي لعبتها الاكاديميه عشان تاذي اللي اذت بيها المجتمع النوبي. زي ما احنا شايفين النهارده المجتمع النوبي في حد ذاته بيشتغل، المجتمع النوبي في حد ذاته بيعافر، بس الاكاديميه ما بتسمحش لاي حاجه تخرج من المجتمع النوبي انها تستقبل او حتى تعتبر او تحترم كمعرفه. بتبقى اسمها ايه؟
وهو ده اللي
كنا
ما هو ده اللي كنا بنتكلم فيه، وبرضه عشان نعمل سامري على اللي كنا بنتكلم فيه مع فينسنت، انه وجود المعرفة like traditional knowledge أو ancestral knowledge from local community في الأماكن دي is viewed as سامعاني؟
بس انا محتاجه لازم اجري دلوقتي عشان الكلام معاكي كان جميل جدا، بس لازم اجيب بحر من المدرسه قبل ما تحصل مشكله كبيره جدا مع المدرسه. فخليني اقول سلام عليكم لكل الناس. شكرا لكل الناس اللي سالت، وشكرا لكل الناس اللي تدخلت معانا، وباي باي يا ديما، واشوفك تاني بكره
ان شاء الله. yes a new day
إن شاء الله.
لنوبيا فيست. وشكرا، سلمي لي على بحر we'll check in later on. yeah عافية لوجو.
عافية لوجو.
أخ محمد شكرا ليك وشكرا للمداخلة، وإن شاء الله بتشاركنا بكرة. أنا هحط هنا في الكومنتس الكالندر للبروجرامز، دي حاجة دايما updated، فتابع يا ريت. وإن شاء الله معنا الأسبوع كله بنتكلم على topics مختلفة عن الحفاظ على التراث النوبي. شكرا لكم وعافية لكم.